There are places we pass on the road that seem forgotten. The kind of land where the grass grows too high and the fences lean like they're tired of standing. In Jefferson County, Mississippi, there's one such place. No one dares touch it. No one dares speak its name after dark. Ask any old-timer about the Whitmore farm, and you'll see it. That flash of fear, like they've suddenly remembered a scream they once tried to forget. Back in the summer of 1876, something strange happened there. A family, Elijah and Mercy Whitmore, lived in that house with their twin sons, Henry and Isaac. The boys were just shy of their 10th birthday when things began to rot. Not just crops or cattle, children. Every child who stepped foot on that farm, whether kin or stranger, never lived to see their 10th birthday. Every single one. At first, the town whispered. Then they stopped whispering altogether. Because whispers became screams. Because the boys started saying things children shouldn't know. Because one night, the sky turned red, and the barn filled with the sound of hundreds of tiny footsteps, but no one was inside. They say the twins died that summer. But that's not exactly true. Because when the sheriff found them, they weren't lying down like dead boys. They were standing, smiling, buried up to their necks, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. That was almost 150 years ago. And still, no child raised on that land has ever made it past 10. There is something deeply unsettling about a town that chooses silence over justice. Not out of ignorance, but out of fear. Jefferson County was one of those towns, warm in its summers, quiet in its winters, and slow enough to bury a secret under a layer of dirt and time. If you asked a local about the Whitmore place, their answer always began with a pause, a glance downward, a muttered prayer. Then silence. The land where the Whitmore house once stood wasn't special on the surface. A wide stretch of farmland, just a few miles off the main road, surrounded by trees so dense they looked like curtains drawn over a stage. The soil was unusually dark, rich, some said, but no one planted anything there after 1876. No cattle were kept there. No fences rebuilt. It just stood, breathing quietly, like it was waiting for something. Locals say the wind on that property never sounds quite right. It whistles, sure, but not like wind should. It seems to mimic things, soft crying, the sound of bare feet dragging through grass, a distant child's laugh when there are no children nearby. And though the house itself had long since collapsed into rotting timber and blackened stone, no one ever tried to clean it up. The government sent someone once, back in the 1920s. He arrived with survey tools and maps. 3 days later, he walked out of the woods barefoot, mumbling something about their eyes. They have no whites. He never spoke again. But this story didn't begin with madness. It began with a family, a proud one. Elijah Whitmore was a former Confederate soldier turned farmer, broad-chested, thick-voiced, and deeply religious in a way that felt more like punishment than worship. His wife, Mercy, was the opposite, slender, soft-spoken, a woman who kept her hair tied back, so tight it gave her headaches. She wrote in journals, quietly, things she never said aloud. And then there were the boys. Henry and Isaac Whitmore were born during a thunderstorm in July of 1866. Even as infants, something about them felt unnatural, not evil, just too still. They barely cried. They rarely blinked. And from the moment they learned to walk, they always walked in step, side by side, like they were parts of one whole thing. People called them the Mirror Boys, though never to their faces. Their mother claimed they shared dreams. She once wrote that they'd wake at the same time each morning, eyes wide, muttering the same words in unison. It's coming. It's under. No one knew what it meant, not even them. But the phrase would return again and again, scratched into the barn wall, whispered beneath dinner tables, murmured in sleep. Jefferson County tolerated the Whitmores. They were God-fearing, hard-working, and quiet enough to ignore. But things changed when a boy named Jesse Langley went missing. Jesse was 9 years old. He had wandered onto the Whitmore property chasing a rabbit, or so his mother said. He never came back. When the sheriff arrived, Elijah claimed he never saw the boy. Mercy stood behind him, her hands shaking behind her apron. The twins watched from the window. smiling. That same, half-lidded smile that never reached their eyes. A week later, Jesse's body was found near the well behind the Whitmore barn. But it wasn't drowned. It wasn't even decayed. It was preserved, like the boy had never aged a day since disappearing. His eyes were open, his mouth too, dirt under his fingernails, teeth cracked, as if he'd been buried alive and dug his way out. The town didn't act. There was no trial, no arrests. Elijah claimed Jesse must have fallen in on his own. A tragic accident. And though no one believed it, no one said otherwise, because by then, fear had begun. 3 other children died that summer, all aged 9, all who had, at some point, played near the Whitmore farm. No one spoke of it directly, but mothers began pulling their children in before dusk. Fathers kept shotguns loaded by the front door. Church sermons changed their tone. Less forgiveness, more fire. Mercy stopped attending church altogether. That fall, she wrote something unusual in her journal. There are no birds near the farm anymore, not even in the sky. I found a line of ants crawling out of Henry's ear this morning. When I tried to wipe them away, he didn't blink, just looked at me and said, "They're building something." The twins hadn't smiled in months, not since their 9th birthday. The strange part, none of it was enough to make the town intervene. Maybe they were afraid of Elijah, or maybe they were more afraid of the land itself, of what might happen if they dug too deep, literally or otherwise. The farm had become a kind of unspoken border. Everyone knew where it started. No one crossed it. The schoolteacher, Miss Evelyn Hart, once tried to report the family to a state official. She disappeared 3 days later. Her horse was found near the woods, reins torn, saddle empty. No blood, no signs of struggle, just gone. And her classroom door, locked from the inside, scratched with tiny handprints. Still, no one came knocking on the Whitmore door, not until the preacher arrived. But that part comes later. First, you have to understand something deeper. The town didn't fail the Whitmore children. It didn't fail Jesse Langley. It didn't fail Miss Hart. It gave up on them. Because whatever lived on that farm, under that soil, inside those boys, it was older than the town, older than the war, older than God. And it wasn't done yet. The first journal was hidden beneath a floorboard under Mercy's side of the bed. She'd carved a small notch in the plank with the tip of a knife, so faint even Elijah never noticed. She didn't keep it out of vanity or leisure. She kept it because there was no one left she could talk to, and some things were too monstrous to be spoken aloud, even to God. July 2nd, 1876. The boys stared at the fireplace for nearly 2 hours today, not speaking, not blinking, just watching it burn like they were waiting for something to crawl out. When I asked what they were doing, Henry said, "We're learning how to breathe like it does." I don't know what that means. I'm afraid to ask. The twins' silence wasn't new. They were always a little different, too synchronized, too still, too pale for children who spent their days outside. But lately, there was something else. A coldness. Not in the air, but in the way they looked at her. They used to smile when she sang to them. Now, they watched her like they were waiting for her to stop breathing. Mercy tried to keep the house warm, clean, normal. She cooked. She prayed. She hung lavender bundles in the corners of their room, like her mother taught her. But the scent never stayed. The flowers always withered within a day. One time, she placed a cross above their bed. It was gone the next morning. When she asked Elijah if he'd taken it down, he frowned and said, "What cross?" She began to wonder if she was losing time. July 7th. I woke up to find mud in the hallway. Small footprints, caked in black earth, leading from the boys' room to the cellar door. Elijah says I'm imagining things, but I cleaned those floors myself last night. I remember. I know I did. The cellar door was always locked. Elijah kept the key. Mercy had asked once what he stored down there, and he grunted. Tools. Traps. Nothing for you to worry about. But she heard sounds at night. Soft tapping, then scratching, like nails on stone. She asked him again. He didn't answer. The next day, she found the key in her apron pocket. She didn't put it there. When she opened the cellar, The air was damp and wrong. It smelled like wet copper and moldy wood. The stairs groaned with each step, and as she descended, her candle flickered, despite no wind. The space was mostly empty, except for the drawings on the wall. Childlike scrawls, circles inside circles, eyes with too many pupils. A stick figure lying on its side, split open, with tiny ants pouring out. And in the far corner, stacked carefully like offerings, dozens of children's shoes, all too small to belong to her boys. July 11th. I tried to burn the shoes. They wouldn't catch, not even the laces. The fire just curled around them like it was afraid. I buried them instead, deep in the woods behind the property. But when I came back the next morning, they were on the porch, clean and lined up. The boys were already awake, smiling. Mercy began to pray harder, not the way Elijah did, loud, rigid, with fists clenched and verses spit like bullets, but softly, with shaking hands and trembling breath. She prayed for her sons, for her sanity, for the God that once lived in this house to return. She started writing in the journal more often, not just events, feelings, the sensation of being watched, even when alone, the whisper of voices just beneath hearing, the nightmares, especially the nightmares. In one, she stood in the hallway of their house, but it wasn't their house. The walls bled, the ceiling pulsed. The door to the boys' room was ajar, and behind it, two shadows stood in the dark, tall, thin, too tall to be children. They spoke in unison, but the words weren't English, weren't human. And when she tried to run, the floor swallowed her feet like wet clay. July 18th. Elijah's skin smells different, like burnt sugar and old milk. He stopped touching me at night. Doesn't even look at me much anymore. When he does, it's like he's seeing through me, or past me. I don't think he dreams anymore. Mercy didn't know when the house changed. Maybe it never had to. Maybe it was always like this, and she just stopped pretending otherwise. There were other things, too, little impossibilities. She hung a mirror in the kitchen, and within a day it cracked across the center, even though no one had touched it. When she looked into it afterward, she saw herself, only she wasn't blinking. And there were children behind her, silent, grinning. July 20th. Henry said something today that made my blood freeze. I was chopping vegetables. He came up behind me and whispered, "Mama, do you remember before we were born?" I asked what he meant. He said, "We used to be deeper, but then we crawled up." She didn't sleep that night, nor the next. She wanted to leave, desperately, to pack the boys and ride to her sister's home in Alabama, or to her aunt's farm near the Tennessee border. But every time she thought about leaving, she got a nosebleed. Her head throbbed. Her skin broke out in hives. And once, while planning her route out of town, she vomited up a small clump of dirt and something that looked like an insect leg. July 22nd. They won't let me leave. Not the boys. Not the house. Not even God. By the end of the month, Mercy had stopped writing. She hid the journal again, not beneath the bed, but inside the wall behind the fireplace, stuffed into a crawl space, wrapped in cloth, sealed with twine and wax. She didn't think anyone would find it. She was wrong. The well behind the Whitmore barn was older than the farmhouse itself, a stone mouth ringed in moss and whispers. Elijah had always warned his sons to keep away from it. He claimed it was dry as sin, and had been for years. But Henry knew better. He could hear it breathe. It began one morning when Mercy found Henry standing beside the well with his eyes closed, lips moving in a silent rhythm like a prayer. She called out, but he didn't flinch. When she reached him and touched his shoulder, his body was cold, his fingers trembling like he'd been sleepwalking through a storm. He turned to her, eyes wide and bloodshot, and whispered, "It wants more." Mercy clutched her chest, staring into the mouth of that black hole. There was no sound, no wind, no trickle of water, just silence, vast and heavy, like it had weight. Elijah filled the well in with stones the same day. He didn't ask questions. He didn't want answers. The memory of Henry's pale skin and hollow voice was already crawling through his veins like infection. But that night, the stones were scattered. as if something from below had spit them out. The next morning, Henry was different. His speech was stiff, measured, like something was pulling words from his throat with puppet strings. When Isaac teased him about it, Henry didn't laugh. He just stared at his twin, eyes blank. "I remember before we were born," he said calmly. "We drowned before we breathed, but it let us come back." Mercy slapped him across the face hard. Her voice shook when she told him to never say that again. But Henry only smiled and walked outside barefoot toward the well. Isaac followed, curiosity outweighing fear. They found him kneeling at the edge, whispering again, this time in a tongue neither boy had ever heard. Or maybe they had. In dreams they couldn't remember. The sound felt sticky, like oil coating the ears, and Isaac's nose began to bleed. He backed away, crying. But Henry kept speaking, and the well responded. A low moan rose from the depth. Not wind, not water. A voice. Something ancient. Something buried. That night, Isaac woke to the sound of something dragging across the floor. He sat up in bed and saw Henry kneeling by the door, whispering. The barn lanterns were lit, swaying without wind. Outside the window, Isaac saw them, shapes. Small, hunched, dozens of them, crawling toward the well like ants to sugar. Children. But they were wrong. Their movements too stiff, too jerky. They weren't walking. They were being pulled. Mercy burst into the boy's room with a candle, her scream shattering the trance. The shapes vanished. The flame flickered violently before blowing out. Henry collapsed. By morning, he remembered nothing, or claimed to. Mercy insisted they take the boys into town, to the preacher, to anyone. But Elijah said no. He said the land had always been cursed, that there was something buried here long before they built the house, before their bloodlines ever walked the earth. "It's the price," Elijah muttered, eyes hollow. "A child for the harvest, a child for the land. Always has been, always will be." Mercy screamed at him, accused him of knowing, of letting something fester. He didn't deny it. He only said, "I thought I could beat it. Thought we were stronger. I was wrong." That night, Isaac couldn't sleep. The silence outside was too perfect. No crickets, no wind, just the quiet breath of the land waiting. He crept to the window and looked toward the well. Henry was there again, and he wasn't alone. A little girl stood beside him, naked and gray, hair like wet hay. Her jaw hung wrong, dislocated. Her eyes were black pits. She held Henry's hand. When Isaac blinked, she was gone. But Henry stood still, smiling. The next morning, Isaac was gone, his bed cold. No footprints, no blood, no sound. Just one thing left behind, a stone from the well, smooth and wet, resting on the pillow. Mercy turned on her son, her only one now, and slapped him hard enough to twist his head sideways. He didn't react. His eyes stayed locked on the well, mouth twitching. "Elijah," she whispered. "What's wrong with him?" Elijah didn't answer. He was staring at Henry too, his face gray. That night, Mercy found a second stone in her pillowcase. She didn't scream. She simply walked to the fireplace and sat there until morning, holding her Bible and muttering broken verses under her breath. Henry didn't eat for 2 days. He spent his time walking barefoot across the yard, whispering to himself, staring at corners no one else could see. Sometimes he'd laugh, soft and slow, and say things like, "He's learning to walk again," or, "She's gonna find you, Mama." On the third night, Mercy heard Isaac's voice. It came from behind the barn, a quiet, playful hum. The tune was familiar, a lullaby she used to sing when they were babies. She rushed out barefoot, nightgown billowing in the windless air, screaming his name. She followed the voice to the edge of the trees, where the cornfields stopped and the woods began. And there she found them. Shoes. Isaac's boots, once warm, now filled with dirt and small stones. The laces tied perfectly. Above them, written on the tree in what looked like mud, was a single word. Soon. Mercy collapsed. Elijah carried her inside. He'd changed since the day of the disappearance. He spoke less, worked more. He didn't pray anymore. He kept the axe by his bed and placed salt lines across every window and door. The house began to smell like sweat and would rot. Henry began to sleepwalk. They'd find him in the barn, arms spread like a scarecrow, eyes open but empty. Sometimes he'd be muttering. Other times, he'd be singing. The exact lullaby Mercy used to sing. Only now, it came out distorted, like the words had water in their lungs. On one occasion, Elijah followed him, barefoot and silent, as Henry wandered across the field and knelt beside the well again. But this time, he wasn't alone. There were others, shapes in the distance, small, hunched, children, and in the center of them stood Isaac. But not Isaac as he was. He was newer, or older, hard to say. His face looked pressed flat, like it had been reshaped. His limbs moved wrong, stiff, mechanical, as if he was being operated from within. He looked at Elijah with dull, black eyes and said in a high voice, "You broke the promise." Then he vanished. The other shapes sank into the earth like smoke. Elijah dragged Henry back into the house that night and nailed shut the front door. Mercy begged him to take them to town, to the preacher, to anyone. But Elijah only stared out the window, clutching his axe, and said, "Town won't take us. Not anymore. They know." Mercy didn't understand what he meant until the letters came. One by one, over the course of 3 days, notes began arriving at the edge of their property. No postmark, no envelopes, just folded papers left under rocks or nailed to fence posts. Each one had the same message, in a handwriting none of them recognized. The farm is paid in youth. When none remain, the land reaps the debt. Mercy wept. Elijah drank. Henry smiled. Elijah Whitmore had always been a man of the earth, a quiet man, a thoughtful man. He believed in the strength of calloused hands and silent Sundays. But on the morning of August 14th, 1876, as he plunged a spade into the fields behind the barn, he felt the earth resist him. It was as if the land no longer wanted to be touched. The soil pushed back. He grunted and pushed harder. The shovel slipped, throwing him off balance. He steadied himself, reached down to test the earth with his fingers, and recoiled. It pulsed, not like wind-blown crops or soft mud after rain. It pulsed, like breath, like something under the surface had lungs, and they were exhaling. He stared down in disbelief. Dirt doesn't move. Soil doesn't breathe. But it had. He felt it. He called for Mercy, but she didn't answer. The house stood quiet behind him, its windows black as unblinking eyes. The air around him grew heavy. Even the flies had stopped their buzzing. He knelt again, this time slower. He pressed his ear to the ground. Nothing. Silence. Then laughter. Faint, high-pitched. Children. Beneath the soil. He shot to his feet, heart slamming into his chest. He backed away, slipping in the dirt. The laughter stopped just as quickly. Not a bird in the sky. Not a breeze in the trees. Only the house, the field, and the weight of something ancient pressing beneath his boots. Inside, Mercy was changing. She had stopped eating. She sat in her rocking chair by the hearth, staring into ashes that no longer burned. The boys played behind her. Quiet, too quiet, always together, always watching their mother with that cold, unfocused stare, as if she were no longer their mother, but a doll, a thing to observe. One night, she whispered to Elijah, her voice cracking, "They're not my boys." Elijah turned slowly. Her voice had been like gravel, dry and uncertain. "What did you say?" he asked. "They came back wrong," she muttered. "Henry and Isaac died in that field. I heard them. I saw them. I buried their shoes." He stared at her, the fire's glow casting shadows across her face. "You're tired," he said, but he knew what she meant, because he'd seen it too. The twins never blinked, unless someone watched them. They sat for hours, back straight, hands folded, humming the same tune under their breath. No words, just the same low hum, like a hymn from a church that had long since burned to the ground. And every night, the soil outside rose. Elijah began marking it with chalk, small white lines around the barn and near the chicken coop. Every morning, The lines were gone, and the dirt had shifted, as if something beneath the surface had stretched in the night. Then came the animals. The chickens were found in a perfect circle, necks twisted, eyes wide open. The dog, Barrow, was nailed to the door of the tool shed, his body uncut, but every bone broken. The townsfolk refused to help. A preacher visited once, said a few rushed prayers, and left pale as bone. He never returned. And still the boys hummed. One night, Elijah woke to the sound of something scraping beneath the floorboards. He followed it barefoot, careful not to creak the floor, and found the boys standing in the kitchen. Just standing, facing the cellar door. Henry turned. "It's almost time, Papa." Elijah's breath caught. "Time for what?" Isaac smiled. "For the soil to feed." Before he could speak again, they turned and walked back upstairs, bare feet silent on the wooden steps. He wanted to follow, demand answers, shake them until they cried like children should, but he couldn't. His legs would not move. The next day, he found the cellar door open, and there were scratch marks on the inside of the door. Not large, not clawed. Tiny, fingernail size. Dozens, maybe more. He called for Mercy. She didn't come. When he climbed the stairs to their bedroom, he found the door nailed shut from the inside. It took him 2 hours to break it open. Inside, Mercy was gone. The bed was perfectly made. Her Bible was open to Ezekiel 37, the Valley of Dry Bones. And on the wall, carved deep into the wood, were the words, "The earth remembers. The earth collects." That night, the laughter returned, louder this time, beneath the house, beneath the fields, echoing up through the cracks. Elijah didn't sleep. The next morning, the sun rose red, and in the field, the soil had split open like a wound. From it, a hand was reaching out, small, pale, unmoving. A child's hand. It was then Elijah realized. The land had been feeding for a long, long time, and now it wanted more. The day of Elijah's 10th birthday arrived with a sky that looked bruised. Thick gray clouds rolled low over the Whitmore farm, casting a dimness over the land that made it feel like dusk had arrived far too early. The crows had returned, dozens of them perched on the roof of the barn, unmoving, as if they had been carved from black stone. They didn't caw. They only watched. Inside the house, Mercy prepared a modest celebration. A single cake, dense, unsweetened cornbread baked over the hearth, sat cooling on the wooden table. There were no candles, no decorations, only a silence that filled every corner of the home, thick and humming like tension before a lightning strike. Isaac was quiet that morning. He sat in the corner near the window, legs crossed, tracing shapes on the dusty floor with his finger. Occasionally, he muttered to himself, but it wasn't until Elijah entered the room that he spoke loud enough to be heard. "They're waiting, you know," Isaac said without looking up. Elijah didn't respond right away. He didn't have to ask who they were. He'd been hearing the whispers, too, beneath the floorboards, behind the walls, even outside in the tall corn. Voices too small to belong to adults, but far too malicious to be called innocent. Children's voices that didn't laugh. They mocked. "I don't want to be 10, Elijah said softly. "You won't," Isaac answered. "Not really." At noon, Sheriff Talbot arrived, not by horse but on foot, his wide-brimmed head dripping with rain. He didn't knock. He just stood at the door and waited until Mercy opened it. When she did, she didn't seem surprised to see him. She looked tired, like she'd expected him to come. "I need to speak with the boys," the sheriff said, his voice flat. "They haven't done anything," Mercy said quietly. "I know," Talbot replied, "but something's coming, and I think they know what it is." Reluctantly, she let him in. Talbot knelt beside the twins. Elijah stared at the floor. Isaac stared straight into the sheriff's eyes. "You remember Jacob Meyer?" Talbot asked. Isaac nodded. "He's the one who stopped aging." Talbot flinched. "He vanished." "No," Isaac said. "He's under the tree now. The one with the handprint." "What are you talking about?" Isaac smiled. "You'll see." Underscore 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 underscore. That night, just after sunset, Elijah sat on the porch, staring into the fields. The corn swayed even though there was no wind. It moved in waves, like something beneath it was breathing. He heard it again. The footsteps. Tiny ones. Hundreds of them. Elijah stood. The crows shifted on the rooftop. One let out a low, rattling croak that sounded like it was choking. Then came the singing. A nursery rhyme. One neither twin remembered learning. 10 for sorrow. 9 for sin. 8 will never breathe again. 7 down and 6 to go. 5 they buried deep below. 4 for pain. 3 for lies. 2 for every child who dies. One by one they disappear, until the twins are all that's near. The song grew louder. The words came from everywhere at once, inside the walls, beneath the porch, from the mouths of the crows. Mercy stepped outside and grabbed Elijah's shoulders. Inside. Now. But the boy didn't move. "I think I know what we are," he said. Mercy's hands trembled. "No, don't say that. I think we've always been here." Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, Isaac stood in the barn, staring up at the rafters. The chains were gone. In their place were handprints, hundreds of them, scorched black into the wood. Some were small as an infant's, others not so small. He turned as the sheriff stepped inside. "Where's your brother?" Talbot asked. Isaac pointed behind him, inside the field. "They're calling him." "Who is?" "The ones who never made it to 10. "Why would they want him?" Isaac didn't blink. "Because he's the last one. After him, the loop starts again." Talbot's hand hovered near his revolver. "What loop?" "The one the land remembers," Isaac whispered. "Every 10 years. Always a twin. Always a farm. Always a birthday. You're saying this happened before?" Isaac only nodded. "We're just this cycle's face." The sheriff backed away slowly, but the barn door slammed shut behind him. That's when the hands came out of the floor. Hundreds of pale, skeletal children's hands, crawling up the walls, reaching from the hay, clawing toward Isaac. He didn't move. He didn't run. He simply whispered, "Happy birthday, Elijah." And somewhere outside, under a sky now blood red, Elijah screamed. The scream rolled across the cornfield like a ripple through still water, twisting the heads of crows and scattering them in a panicked spiral toward the darkening sky. Mercy bolted from the porch before the echo had even died. She ran barefoot across the wet dirt, the mud clinging to her nightgown like desperate fingers. Her lungs burned, but she didn't slow. Her son was out there. Elijah was out there. She pushed into the corn, and the stalks parted easily, too easily, as if they were moving aside for her. "Elijah!" she cried, but the corn swallowed her voice. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It was suffocating, the kind of silence that exists deep underwater or inside a sealed tomb. Then she saw at him. Elijah stood in a perfect clearing within the corn, his back to her. At his feet was a ring of stones, each one etched with a symbol she didn't recognize. Some shimmered faintly, as though pulsing with breath. "Elijah," she whispered. He turned to her slowly. His eyes weren't right. They weren't glowing. They weren't bloodshot. They were simply wrong, far too calm, too ancient. Like something had looked through them and decided to stay. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said quietly. "Come back to the house. Please." But he didn't move. The ground around the stone ring began to tremble. "Elijah now." A low chant began. Not from Elijah, not from Mercy, but from the corn itself. 10 must fall before the seed is clean. 10 must walk where time has been. The stalk started bending inward, curling and warping as if rotting in fast-forward. Shapes formed in the husks, small bodies, heads tilted unnaturally, hollow mouths that moved in rhythm with the chant. Mercy rushed forward and grabbed Elijah's hand, yanking him from the ring. The moment his foot left the circle, the corn exploded outward in all directions like a silent scream. The shapes disappeared. The chanting ceased. Elijah collapsed in her arms. "I don't think I'm me anymore," he murmured. Underscore, 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 underscore. Back in the barn, Isaac had not moved since the hands came. He stood motionless in the storm of grasping fingers. Sheriff Talbot had drawn his weapon, but it was useless. Bullets did nothing to the hands. They weren't made of flesh. They were memories. "I see it now," Talbot said through gritted teeth. "This place, it's eating time." Isaac turned slowly. "It's not the place. It's the pact." Talbot looked confused. "What pact?" Isaac walked forward, the hands parting around him like reeds in water. "Someone made a promise long ago. To keep this land fertile, to keep it safe from plague, from war, from death." "A deal?" Talbot asked. "With what?" "Not what," Isaac said. "Who?" He looked up. The rafters were gone. In their place was a ceiling of eyes. Thousands of them. Tiny, lidless, blinking in unison. "They were children once," Isaac whispered. "All of them. Some tried to escape. Some tried to warn others. But all of them stayed behind." Talbot stumbled back, the weight of it sinking in. "And the twins?" Isaac's face twisted into something that was no longer innocent. "The twins are the collectors." Underscore, 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 underscore. That night, Elijah wouldn't eat. Mercy sat beside him in the candlelight, brushing his hair gently with trembling fingers. "Do you remember when you were born?" he asked her. Mercy blinked. "Of course not." "Why?" "I do. I remember the cold floor, the whispering in the walls. I remember the deal." Her hand stopped. "What deal, Elijah?" He looked up at her. "You gave us names. That's what let it in." Mercy recoiled. "That's not true. You're my sons." He tilted his head. "Ah, oui." The candle flickered violently, then went out. When Mercy relit it, Elijah was asleep. But he wasn't breathing. Not fully. Not rhythmically. Just occasionally. Underscore, 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 underscore. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the low hum of voices, hundreds of them. Some were too young to have ever spoken. Others chanted in dead dialects. And in that wind came a sound that hadn't been heard in generations on Whitmore land, the distant toll of a bell. It came from the tree with the handprint, the one where Jacob Meyer was last seen. The bell had no rope, no clapper, no reason to ring, but it did. Talbot stood beneath the tree now, gun holstered, Bible in hand. He opened it, searching for an answer. But every page had changed. Instead of scripture, it now held children's drawings, crude sketches of the farm, the twins, the barn, and the clearing, all scrawled in red. The last page showed a single image, 2 boys standing before a crowd of faceless children, all reaching for them, and written beneath, in a child's shaky hand, "Make them stay." Talbot closed the Bible slowly and whispered to the tree, "What are you?" And the bark shifted. A face formed. Not demonic, not monstrous, just a child's face. mouth sewn shut, eyes wide, and tears, not of water, but of dust, dripped from its cheeks. Then, with one sharp wind gust, the face was gone, but the bell kept ringing. Underscore, 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 underscore. Back at the house, Isaac returned from the barn covered in black smudges. He sat beside Elijah, who still hadn't woken. He's being pulled, Isaac told their mother. By what? By the ones who stayed behind. Mercy grabbed Isaac's shoulders. Then we pull him back. Isaac shook his head. That's not how it works. One twin leaves. One twin stays. That's the balance. Mercy's voice cracked. No, not my boys. I won't lose either of you. Isaac didn't blink. You already have. You just don't remember it. And then, with no emotion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a drawing. Folded, yellowed, almost crumbling. He handed it to her. It showed two boys, standing before the same barn, wearing the same clothes. But it wasn't Isaac and Elijah. The names were written beneath them. Ephraim and Elias Whitmore, 1816. Mercy's breath caught in her throat. You weren't the first, Isaac said. And you won't be the last. It was no longer the soft hush that passed over cornfields or rustled sleeping oaks. It was harsher now, urgent, violent, like something had been waiting decades to scream. When it rushed through the creaking wood slats of the Whitmore house, it didn't whistle. It spoke. Henry heard it first, lying in the attic beside his brother. His eyes snapped open, sweat glistening across his brow despite the cold. A low murmur echoed against the rafters. Words that weren't words, syllables not meant for human tongues. Did you hear it too? Isaac asked, sitting up, voice trembling. Henry nodded. It said, Mama's name. Downstairs, Mercy stirred in her bed, a candle flickering by her bedside. The flame danced in agitation, leaping with each gust that passed through the broken windows. She tried to get up, but felt her limbs resist, like the bed had grown teeth and was gnawing at her bones. The shadows on the walls pulsed, stretching longer and longer, thin and crooked like the fingers of a starving child. A knock came at the door, then another, then 10. 47 knocks, each perfectly spaced, slow and steady, like a clock counting down. When Elijah opened the door, the wind didn't blow in. It stepped in. A coldness flooded the house, heavy and knowing. Elijah's breath fogged. He stared into the nothingness, past the front porch, toward the tree line, and swore he saw something move between the trees. A hunched shape, impossibly tall, dragging something behind it. Chains. The boys came down the stairs barefoot, pale and stiff, as if sleepwalking. Except they weren't asleep. Papa, Isaac said, pointing to the shadows. They're coming. Who? Elijah whispered. The others. The twins moved to the center of the room, where the wooden floor had recently split open from rot. The wind circled them, like a predator sizing up prey. Then the whispering began again, this time louder. Dozens of names repeated in unison, echoing from the walls, the windows, the floorboards. All were children's names. One name repeated more than any other. Elias, Mercy whispered, clutching her chest. She hadn't said that name in 10 years. Their firstborn, the child who died in his sleep at 9, buried behind the barn in a small, unmarked grave. The twins turned their heads toward their mother in eerie unison. You left him there, Henry said. He wasn't alone, Isaac added. He's never been alone. Elijah grabbed his rifle and pointed it at the boys. Stop this. Whatever trick you're playing, stop it now. The boys didn't flinch. Instead, their eyes rolled back, and from their mouths came a chorus, not of their own voices, but of dozens of children, speaking through them. We never left. We were never buried. We just stopped growing. Mercy dropped to her knees, covering her ears. What do you want from us? The house groaned under some unbearable weight, as though the foundation itself could no longer hold back the past. And then came the sound of digging, dozens of tiny hands scraping at wood and soil. From behind the walls, from beneath the floor, from the cellar, Henry and Isaac reached out and took their parents' hands. Their skin was cold, unnaturally so. "We remember everything," they said together. "We remember what you promised, and what you took." Suddenly, every candle in the house extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed them whole, and from the cellar, the door creaked open by itself. What followed was not silence. It was breathing. Faint, childish breathing. Dozens of voices gasping through dirt-choked lungs. Waiting, hungry, forgotten. And the wind, still whispering, circled the house like a predator. Not looking for a way in, looking for a way out. There are certain silences that don't soothe, they press. Like thick wool shoved into your ears, like the moment before a scream. That's the silence that followed the cellar door creaking open. Not peace, just waiting, holding its breath. Elijah stepped forward first, rifle trembling in his hands, though he knew by now it was useless. What do you shoot when the thing haunting your home used to be your son? "Don't go down there," Mercy whispered, but it was too late. The twins stood still at the threshold, neither stopping nor encouraging their father. Their eyes were blank again, not rolled back, just vacant, as if their souls had stepped out to make room for something else. Elijah reached the cellar steps. The wooden boards moaned under his boots like they remembered the weight of what had once been buried down there. He held the lantern out before him, the flame flickering in confusion, casting shadows that leaned in closer than they should have. The cellar wasn't deep. A dozen steps and you could see everything. At least, you used to. But now the light stopped short at the base. Beyond it was only black. Not the dark of absence, but the dark of presence. The kind that watches you back. Elijah took one more step and stopped. Something moved in that black. A child's foot. Pale, bare, standing on the soil. Then another, and another, and another. Children, dozens of them. All sizes, all ages, all standing shoulder to shoulder, packed into that small space like they'd never left. And their eyes, some hollow, some gleaming, some still wet with fresh tears. But at the center stood Elias, his face not twisted or grotesque. Not a monster, just a boy. Their boy. He opened his eyes. "Elijah," the boy said, voice soft and warm. "You promised me I wouldn't be alone." Elijah fell to his knees. The rifle dropped from his hands. "We didn't mean to leave you. I buried you." "Ah!" Elias blinked slowly, sadly. "You buried my body, but not me." Behind him, the other children stepped forward. One girl had a doll missing an arm. A boy clutched the remains of a wooden horse. Another child wore a rotting church ribbon. Every one of them had something left behind, some part of their story unfinished. "They come here," Elias whispered. "They always come, because this land calls them, because this house remembers." From upstairs, Mercy screamed. Elijah turned, but the stairs behind him were gone, replaced with earth. Thick and writhing like worms were crawling beneath it. He wasn't in a cellar anymore. He was inside the grave. Underscore, 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 underscore. Upstairs, Mercy tried to flee, dragging the twins by their wrists, but their feet didn't move. They were anchored, staring forward. "Let go," she shrieked. "We have to get out." The house groaned again, louder this time. From the windows, every pane of glass fogged over in unison, then cleared, revealing faces looking in. Children, not reflections. Faces, pressing against the glass with bloodless skin and wide, longing eyes. The front door slammed open, not from force, from invitation. And Mercy saw them, marching through the field. Small shapes, hundreds of them, walking with slow, steady, synchronized steps. She backed away, shaking. "What would you want?" One of the twins finally spoke. To grow. And the other. To be remembered. Mercy fell to the ground as the children reached the porch. Their feet made no sound on the wood. Then Elias stepped into the house. He no longer looked like a boy who had died. He looked like something death had been trying to hold on to, and failed. "I forgive you," he whispered to his mother. Then he turned to the twins. "But they don't." And suddenly, the boys began to scream. Not words, just sound. Agony, terror, 1,000 unspoken memories clawing their way out of their mouths. Their skin paled further. Their hair thinned. They were aging. Rapidly. In seconds, they were no longer 10. They were 12. Then 16. Then 23. Their bones cracked as their bodies shifted violently. Time tried to catch up all at once. Mercy reached for them, crying, "Stop it. You're killing them." "No," Elias said gently. "We're letting them go." One final scream, and the boys collapsed to the floor. Dead? No. Sleeping. The children outside stopped, and Elias turned to the door. "You buried us. You forgot us. But now we remember ourselves." One by one, the children filed into the house. They touched the walls, the chairs, the fireplace, as if reacquainting themselves with the home stolen from them long ago. Then Elias walked to the hearth, knelt, and opened the floorboards. From beneath, he pulled a single small box. He opened it. Inside was a lock of his own hair, wrapped in ribbon, preserved by Mercy after his death. "This is all that's left of who I was," he said softly. Mercy knelt beside him, unable to stop sobbing. "I kept it to remember you." "But you never said my name again," Elias replied. Then he did something strange. He took the lock of hair, pressed it against his own chest, and it vanished, absorbed into his body like soil into rain. The other children began to glow faintly. A light, not bright, soft and warm, began to pulse around them. They were being called home. Mercy looked around as one by one, the children began to vanish, like embers caught in a breeze. Some smiled, some wept. Elias was the last. He touched both of the twins' foreheads. "They are free now. Let them live." Then he turned to Mercy. "Say my name, Mama." She placed her hand on his face. "Elias, my Elias." And just like that, he was gone. The wind fell silent. The house exhaled. And somewhere below, Elijah awoke, his hand no longer in the grave, but curled around the base of the cellar steps. Alone, but alive. The boy didn't speak. He just stood there at the base of the stairs, where light from the broken window traced his outline like a second skin. His hair was wet, his skin too pale to be alive. But it was the eyes that broke Clara, not because they were familiar, but because they held recognition. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. "Henry," she whispered, but she already knew it wasn't. The child's smile widened, mechanical, like pulled with wires from beneath the skin. "You were told not to come," he said, voice layered, as if two voices echoed at once, one small, one ancient. All around her, the house groaned. Floorboards sighed with the weight of invisible feet. The walls bled brown stains that twisted downward like fingers reaching from the ceiling. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a living thing, and it remembered everything. Behind her, Amos's breathing had stopped. When Clara turned, he was already down, limbs twisted like he'd fallen from a great height, though he'd never moved. His eyes wide, lips cracked open. Dead, but smiling. The boy took a step closer. "It's not the house that kills," he said. "It's the forgetting." Clara's body trembled, not from cold, but from the thing rising within her. A memory not her own. The feeling of dirt in her mouth. The sound of children screaming in a circle underground. The lullaby Mercy Whitmore used to sing, now echoing through her head, backwards. The walls pulsed. From beneath the floorboards, hundreds of small hands reached through the cracks, grasping at her boots, her legs, her shadow. Children, still here, still 10, still trapped. She backed toward the door, heart cracking under the weight of realization. This wasn't a haunting. This was a cycle. They don't age, because time doesn't move here, she whispered. This house, it's a loop. The boy nodded once, until someone remembers it fully. Not the story, the truth. Then he turned, walked back into the hallway, not fading, not vanishing, but blending into the rotting wallpaper, as though the house was reclaiming him. Claire didn't scream. She ran, out the front door, down the overgrown path, past the rusted scarecrow that now had no face, past the bones of what was once a swing set, past her own car, which had sunk half into the mud, vines curling through its broken windshield. She didn't stop until her lungs failed her, until her body collapsed on the roadside. And still, when the sheriff found her, hours later, she was whispering to herself over and over, "The house remembers. The house remembers. The house remembers." Some stories warn, some stories entertain, and some stories, like this one, watch. The Whitmore farm has been abandoned for nearly a century, but that's only because no one's tried to rebuild it. No one has remembered it fully. Until now. You listened. You know its name, and you know the rule. Any child who hears this tale must never set foot there, because once the story lives inside you, the house is no longer just in Mississippi. It's anywhere. Any cracked old home on the edge of town. Any basement that feels too cold for summer. Any whisper in the walls when you're alone. Now ask yourself, was that creak in the hallway just the woods settling? Or is it finally remembering you?